Maximizing productivity, mental clarity, and physical health begins with aligning your daily behaviors to your internal biological clock, or what's called the circadian rhythm. This internal 24-hour clock governs everything from your alertness, body temperature, hormone levels, to when you're most primed for focused work or physical output. And it's not abstract, it's anchored in deeply biological processes regulated by light, movement, and timing. Every human has what's called a supercharge, asthmatic nucleus, or ASEAN, located in the hypothalamus of the brain. This structure coordinates the circadian rhythm, but it doesn't do it alone. It requires light as its primary input, specifically early morning sunlight. When light, particularly light that's rich in blue wavelengths, hits the cells in the retina, specifically the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, iPRGCs, it sends a signal to the ASEAN. This signal triggers a cascade of biological processes that include a cortisol pulse, which helps you feel alert, as well as a suppression of melatonin, which is a hormone that promotes sleep. So, the most powerful tool you can use every single day to improve your productivity and mental clarity is to get sunlight into your eyes within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking. That simple behavior sets a timer on your brain and body for all sorts of important biological rhythms. For instance, it helps establish when your body starts to increase its core temperature, when it prepares for peak physical performance, and even when your brain is most capable of entering states of deep focus. Now, one key point: sunlight isn't just beneficial because it's natural or healthy. It's because the intensity of light outdoors, even on a cloudy day, is dramatically higher than indoor artificial light. Indoors, you might get 500 to 1, 0 lux of light. Outside, even on a gloomy day, you're looking at 10 zeros, 0 to 100, 0 lux. That's an order of magnitude difference, and the light intensity is what triggers those iPRGC to send that critical signal to your ASEAN. Without that input, your circadian rhythm begins to drift. And when that happens, sleep quality suffers, mood becomes erratic, and productivity declines. In terms of timing, the earlier you get that sunlight, the better, but not at the expense of sleep. You don't need to wake up at sunrise unless your schedule demands it. But once you are awake, the priority is to get outside, ideally for 10 to 20 minutes. If sunlight is not available, say it's winter or you're in a location with limited natural light, a bright artificial light that emits around 10 zeros, 0 lux can be a backup, but natural light is always preferred. Now, let's move to movement, specifically early day movement. Once you've anchored your circadian rhythm with sunlight, adding physical movement, even low intensity, creates a compounding effect on your alertness and cognitive readiness. That's because movement increases norepinephrine and dopamine in the brain, both of which are neuromodulators associated with focus and motivation. The movement doesn't have to be intense. A brisk walk, light jog, or even dynamic stretching outdoors under sunlight can combine both tools into one powerful protocol. Again, this isn't just about feeling good. These practices have measurable effects on brain chemistry and hormone profiles. Norepinephrine heightens alertness and precision. Dopamine increases motivation and reward anticipation. Together, they prepare your brain for high cognitive output. If you can layer in some form of directed goal-oriented behavior, like reviewing a to-do list or setting your top 3 priorities for the day, while your brain is in this high norepinephrine, high dopamine state, you enhance what's called neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to change and wire based on experience. This window of plasticity is especially wide in the first 2 hours after waking, and it's modulated by these very neuromodulators. That's why it's ideal to do your most demanding cognitive work during this time block. The timing of food intake also plays a role in productivity and brain performance. While eating is essential, there is increasing evidence suggesting that delaying your first meal by an hour or 2 after waking can help maintain elevated alertness and energy. The mechanism behind this lies in the fact that digestion shifts the nervous system from a sympathetic, alert state into more of a parasympathetic rest and digest state. So, if your goal is high productivity in the early part of the day, it may be beneficial to delay your first meal slightly, though this will vary by individual and energy demands. Now let's talk about focused work and how to time it. There is a concept called ultradian rhythms, 90-minute cycles that govern peaks and valleys in mental performance. During these cycles, you'll find natural waves of alertness and fatigue. The first peak generally starts within 60 to 90 minutes of waking and is often the best time to engage in deep, focused work. That means writing, coding, decision, making, or problem solving. This window is where your brain is primed for what's called task. Bracketing, the ability to sit with a single problem, hold it in working memory, and solve it. During these 90-minute cycles, eliminate distractions. Use tools like the Pomodoro technique if necessary, but the key is to fully engage with one cognitively demanding task. After 90 minutes, take a deliberate break, ideally with some form of physical movement or visual rest. Looking far into the distance helps reset the focus mechanisms in the eye, which can reduce mental fatigue and eye strain, particularly if you've been looking at a screen. This strategy isn't just about comfort, it's about sustaining high-performance cognitive states over time. So, how does this tie back to maximizing both physical and mental performance? Think of your cognitive performance and physical readiness as governed by a series of feedback loops. Morning sunlight and early movement set the tone for these loops. Focused work during peak alertness periods leverages your brain's natural neurochemical environment. And breaks between those work bouts preserve your ability to engage again with high quality. As the day progresses, the body undergoes natural changes, core body temperature increases, which is one of the reasons why physical strength, reaction time, and coordination peak in the late afternoon. This makes that time block, typically between 3 to 6 p.m., ideal for physical training. Strength, endurance, and flexibility all show improvements when core body temperature is higher. And training during this window not only supports physical health, but also helps recalibrate the body's stress systems, promoting better sleep and recovery later on. Another element critical to all of this is deliberate visual anchoring and eye movement, two tools that are often overlooked. Your visual system is directly connected to your autonomic nervous system. When you narrow your visual field, staring closely at a screen or focusing intently on something up close, you activate the sympathetic nervous system, which increases alertness and, over time, stress. This is useful during focused work, but not all day long. Deliberately broadening your visual field, what's called panoramic vision, has the opposite effect. It calms the nervous system and promotes parasympathetic activation. A simple tool is to occasionally lift your eyes off your screen and look at the horizon for 30 to 60 seconds. This resets your nervous system, reduces cognitive fatigue, and enhances productivity across longer time spans. So if we were to zoom out and look at the whole day as a performance arc, it starts with anchoring your biology through light and movement. Then leveraging your early mental peak for deep work, using visual and cognitive rest to reset between bouts, aligning physical performance windows with body temperature, and ensuring that you respect the natural drop in alertness in the evening by dimming lights and tapering stimulation to prepare for sleep. All of this is not just a hack or tip, it's about working with your biology, not against it. Productivity isn't just about doing more. It's about doing things in a way that aligns with your brain and body's natural rhythms. When you start thinking of sunlight, movement, work timing, and rest as tools, not luxuries, you create a system of sustainable high-performance behavior that optimizes not just output, but well-being. Your brain and body rely on a highly adaptive system to regulate energy and stress, and this system can be modulated by specific tools that influence the autonomic nervous system. The three most accessible and powerful tools you can use daily to steer your internal states are breathwork, cold exposure, and nutrition. These interventions directly impact how alert, focused, or calm you feel, not by placebo, but by triggering well-characterized neurobiological mechanisms. Understanding how and when to use them gives you reliable control over your physiological and cognitive performance. Let's begin with the breath. Breathing is unique in that it's both automatic and voluntary. You breathe without thinking, but you can also consciously control your breath, and this gives you a direct channel into your autonomic nervous system. That's the part of your nervous system that controls things like heart rate, digestion, and arousal levels. When you're stressed, you breathe more quickly and shallowly. When you're calm, your breathing is slower and deeper. The causality goes both ways, meaning that changing your breathing can shift your state from stress to calm or from fatigue to alertness. One of the most reliable breathing protocols for reducing stress quickly is what's called the physiological sigh. This is a pattern of 2 inhales, a regular inhale followed by a second, shorter sniff, followed by a long exhale. The mechanism here is deeply rooted in lung physiology. During waking hours, the alveoli in your lungs, which are the little sacs that exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, can collapse slightly, especially under stress. The double inhale reinflates these sacs, and the long exhale helps offload carbon dioxide efficiently, which lowers your heart rate almost instantly. You can do 1 to 3 cycles of the physiological sigh anytime you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or dysregulated. The effects are measurable: a drop in heart rate, a shift in heart rate variability toward parasympathetic tone, and a subjective sense of calm. The beauty of this tool is that it doesn't require special equipment, location, or preparation. You can do it anywhere before a big meeting, after a difficult conversation, or even in moments of indecision or fatigue. It is fast, free, and grounded in rigorous respiratory physiology. On the other side of the arousal spectrum is the need for increased energy and alertness, especially when you're hitting a lull or need to reset your cognitive engagement. In this context, you can use a different breathing protocol, namely cyclic hyperventilation. This is done by taking 20 to 30 deep inhales and forceful exhales, followed by a breath hold after the last exhale. This kind of breathing increases oxygen levels temporarily, but more importantly, it reduces carbon dioxide, which results in a temporary rise in blood pH and a shift into sympathetic nervous system dominance. This is not something to overuse or practice while driving or operating machinery. But done deliberately in a safe environment, cyclic hyperventilation can be a powerful tool for ramping up energy and creating a controllable stress state, which is actually useful for resilience. You're training your nervous system to tolerate heightened arousal and to return to baseline. This kind of exposure builds stress tolerance and enhances your ability to remain cognitively sharp in pressure situations. Now, cold exposure also taps into this same stress-modulating system, but it does so through an external stimulus. Deliberate cold exposure, whether through cold showers, ice baths, or cold plunges, creates a predictable increase in norepinephrine and epinephrine. These are neuromodulators and hormones involved in alertness, attention, and stress response. When you expose your body to cold water, particularly water that feels uncomfortably cold but safe, your brain rapidly releases these chemicals to mobilize energy and increase focus. The effects are not just transient. Studies show that just 1 to 3 minutes of cold exposure can raise dopamine levels by up to 250% and sustain those elevated levels for hours afterward. That's not just about willpower or toughness, that's measurable chemistry. And because dopamine is involved in motivation, drive, and learning, cold exposure becomes more than just a physical challenge. It becomes a neural reset that enhances how your brain engages with your goals. The key here is to use the cold deliberately. The water should be cold enough to make you want to get out, but not so cold that it's dangerous. You don't need to do long sessions. 1 to 5 minutes is often enough, and frequency matters more than duration. 2 to 4 times per week of deliberate cold exposure can yield cumulative benefits in stress resilience, energy regulation, and mental clarity.
It's also worth noting that the mental training that comes from resisting the urge to get out of cold water creates what's called top-down control, where your prefrontal cortex asserts control over
the brainstem and limbic structures. This is powerful training for emotional regulation. Timing cold exposure in the early part of the day is generally best because of its activating effects. Doing it late in the evening may disrupt sleep for some people due to elevated arousal. Also, pairing cold exposure after a workout may blunt muscle hypertrophy to some degree. So if muscle growth is your goal, it's better to separate strength training and cold exposure by several hours. Now let's integrate nutrition into this toolbox. Food, like breath and temperature, is information. It sends chemical signals that influence your brain and body. What and when you eat has a significant impact on your energy levels, cognitive clarity, and emotional state. The central idea here is glycemic control, the regulation of blood sugar levels. When you eat high sugar or high refined, carb meals, your blood glucose spikes and then crashes. This creates cycles of energy surges followed by fatigue and irritability. Over time, it wears down your ability to focus, sustain mood, and make disciplined decisions. To counter this, prioritize meals that are high in protein and fiber early in the day. Protein not only supports muscle repair, it triggers the release of dopamine and acetylcholine, two neurotransmitters critical for attention and motivation.
Fiber slows the absorption of glucose, smoothing out energy fluctuations.
A breakfast with eggs, nuts, vegetables, or lean meats will yield a more stable cognitive output than one with cereal, pastries, or sweetened beverages.
Another useful strategy is intermittent fasting, or more broadly, time-restricted feeding.
Compressing your eating window into 8 to 10 hours during the daytime aligns with your circadian rhythm and allows for extended periods of insulin sensitivity and digestive rest. This approach, when done correctly, improves metabolic health and can increase focus, especially in the morning hours when you're not digesting a large meal.
The ketones that are produced in mild fasted states also serve as an efficient energy source for the brain, often leading to a heightened sense of clarity and output.
Hydration is often overlooked but absolutely essential. Even a 1 to 2% drop in body water can impair cognitive performance and mood. Start your day with water, ideally 16 to 24 ounces, and continue drinking throughout the day. If you're consuming caffeine, remember that it's a diuretic, so increase your water intake accordingly. Adding a small pinch of salt to your water, especially in the morning or during workouts, can help replenish electrolytes and support adrenal function, which in turn affects energy and resilience. Stress, caffeine, while powerful, should be used wisely. It increases dopamine availability, which helps with focus and motivation. But if consumed too early after waking, it can blunt your natural cortisol rise. A more optimal time is 60 to 90 minutes after waking, when your cortisol is beginning to drop naturally.
This timing enhances the caffeine's benefits without overstimulating your system. Also, avoiding caffeine intake after 2 or 3 p.m.
is advisable for most people to prevent interference with sleep onset. The gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication between your gastrointestinal system and your central nervous system, also plays a major role in energy and stress.
Fermented foods, fiber-rich vegetables, and prebiotics help maintain a healthy gut microbiome, which in turn supports mood regulation and immune function. An inflamed or dysregulated gut can contribute to brain fog, irritability, and low energy, all of which impair productivity. This isn't just about avoiding junk food. It's about actively feeding your gut the nutrients it needs to support your brain.
So when we look at the big picture, these tools, breath, cold, and nutrition, operate on different layers of your physiology. Breathwork allows immediate access to nervous system regulation. Cold exposure triggers hormonal and neural cascades that build long-term resilience. And nutrition provides the substrate, the actual molecules that your brain and body use to function and adapt. Using them in combination and at the right times of day allows you to not just respond to stress, but to shape your internal landscape proactively. You can think of your day as a sequence of energy management decisions. When you wake up, use light, movement, and possibly a small delay in food intake to amplify your natural rise in alertness. When stress or anxiety spikes, use the physiological sigh. When you feel sluggish, try cyclic breathing or a cold shower. Structure meals that support glycemic control and neurotransmitter balance. Hydrate intelligently, and always remember that these tools are not isolated, they interact and stack. The more consistently you use them, the more your system adapts to work for you, not against you. Ultimately, the goal is not just to feel better in the moment, though these tools help with that, but to create a foundation for sustainable, high-performance living that supports both your output and your internal well-being over the long term. The ability to sustain motivation, focus, and drive toward long-term goals is not simply a function of willpower or personality. It is governed by a chemical system in the brain, primarily the dopamine system. Dopamine is often misunderstood. Many people associate it with pleasure or feeling good, but what dopamine truly governs is motivation, craving, and the pursuit of things we value. Understanding how to leverage dopamine in your daily life can dramatically change how productive, resilient, and goal-directed you are, and it gives you the ability to regulate your internal reward system rather than be hijacked by external stimuli. Dopamine is not released in a vacuum. It is released in response to specific behaviors, cues, or even thoughts, and it follows a pattern that is crucial to understand: baseline and peaks. At any given time, you have a baseline level of dopamine circulating in your system. That baseline sets your mood, your general motivation level, and even your capacity to enjoy other experiences. When you do something pleasurable or anticipate a reward, whether it's receiving a compliment, eating a delicious food, checking social media, or achieving a goal, your dopamine levels spike. Then, they drop, often below the baseline, before returning to normal. This drop below baseline is a key part of the system. When dopamine dips, you feel less motivated, less interested, and less enthusiastic about the very same things that previously excited you. This is why people often report a low after achieving something big or after overindulging in pleasurable experiences. The more frequent and higher the peaks, especially if they're artificially induced, the lower the baseline tends to become over time. And this has serious consequences. If you're constantly bombarding your dopamine system with high stimuli, scrolling on social media, binge eating, consuming junk information, your brain becomes less sensitive to the natural, more subtle sources of dopamine, like meaningful work, learning, or personal growth. So, one of the foundational principles of mastering motivation is learning how to raise and preserve your dopamine baseline, rather than constantly chasing spikes. That begins with understanding the difference between external and internal rewards. External rewards are things like praise, money, likes, or status. Internal rewards are your ability to attach meaning, purpose, or progress to an activity, regardless of the outcome. Neuroscience shows that when you reward effort, not just success, you train your brain to release dopamine in response to the process, not just the result. This is what creates sustainable motivation. There's a phenomenon called dopamine scheduling, not in the formal literature, but as a useful concept. It refers to strategically placing behaviors that evoke dopamine in your day to maximize productivity without burning out your dopamine system. One method is to avoid stacking multiple dopamine triggers at once. For example, listening to music while drinking coffee while scrolling social media before you even begin work stacks multiple sources of dopamine. This may feel great in the moment, but it raises your threshold for stimulation, making less intense, more meaningful tasks feel dull by comparison. Instead, try spacing your dopamine, releasing behaviors. If you enjoy listening to music or drinking coffee, reserve that for a focused work session rather than a passive dopamine binge. Use it as a tool to enhance engagement, not as a baseline requirement. Similarly, avoid always celebrating goals with external rewards. Instead, tell yourself something like, "The effort I'm putting in right now, this moment of pushing through discomfort, is the reward." This isn't just motivational talk, it's backed by data showing that the prefrontal cortex, when used to reframe effort as rewarding, communicates with the dopamine-rich areas of the brain to reinforce behavior. This concept was studied in animal models, and it's remarkably applicable to humans. In one experiment, animals that were trained to associate effort with reward showed sustained motivation over time, even when external rewards were removed. Those that only worked for the reward, without internal reinforcement, burned out faster and became less willing to exert effort. Your brain functions the same way. If you want to build lasting drive, you must learn to self-reward the effort, and you do that by mentally tagging effortful experiences as meaningful, valuable, or identity-defining. Now, there are also physiological tools that can support healthy dopamine regulation. Sleep is number one. Deep, quality sleep allows for proper dopamine receptor resetting. Chronic sleep deprivation lowers dopamine receptor sensitivity, which means you need more stimulation to get the same level of drive or satisfaction. One night of poor sleep can lower your baseline, so improving your sleep hygiene, dark room, consistent wake time, limiting caffeine late in the day isn't just about rest. It's about protecting the very system that fuels your motivation and focus. Another tool is cold exposure. We touched on this in the previous keynote, but it's worth reiterating in this context. Deliberate cold exposure causes a significant and sustained increase in dopamine, in some cases up to 2.5 times baseline, but unlike artificial sources of dopamine like drugs or junk food, cold exposure does not seem to create a sharp crash afterward. Instead, it raises dopamine gradually, and that elevation lasts for hours. So using cold water exposure, 1 to 5 minutes early in the day, is not just a stress resilience tool. It's a powerful way to raise your dopamine baseline in a sustainable way. Exercise is another major contributor. Physical activity, especially intense or sustained effort, increases dopamine receptor density, meaning your brain becomes more sensitive to dopamine. So regular exercise doesn't just make you feel good post-workout. It reshapes your dopamine system so that you're more responsive to everyday rewards, more motivated, and more driven to act. And when paired with cognitive reframing, reminding yourself during a hard workout that this effort is what makes me better, you strengthen the association between challenge and reward. Nutrition also matters here. The raw materials for dopamine synthesis include the amino acid L-tyrosine, found in high-protein foods like eggs, fish, poultry, and certain legumes. If your diet is chronically low in protein or micronutrients like iron, vitamin B6, and magnesium, your dopamine production may suffer. Supporting the system nutritionally means eating in a way that sustains neurotransmitter synthesis and receptor health. It's also important to be aware of behaviors that deplete or dysregulate dopamine. One of the most significant is excessive digital stimulation. Every time you scroll and encounter novelty, new posts, new videos, new headlines, your brain releases tiny pulses of dopamine. These aren't major spikes, but the constant drip, drip, drip trains your brain to expect frequent, unpredictable rewards. Over time, this conditions your brain away from sustained attention and toward novelty, seeking behavior that makes focused work, which often lacks instant gratification, feel less rewarding. So using tools like digital fasting, reducing screen time, or scheduling social media into specific, time-limited windows can protect your dopamine baseline and recondition your brain to find satisfaction in deeper, more meaningful work. Another related factor is goal setting. Dopamine is heavily involved in anticipation, the pursuit of a goal, not just its attainment. So when you structure your day with clear, achievable goals, especially micro, goals within a larger task, you create a cascade of dopamine rewards that keep you engaged. For example, rather than writing finish report on your task list, break it down into outline report, write intro, write section 1, and so on. Each completion triggers a small dopamine pulse, reinforcing momentum and making the task more intrinsically rewarding. And finally, novelty itself can be leveraged, but intentionally. Dopamine is highly responsive to novel stimuli. This doesn't mean you need constant variety, but adding a new environment, new skill, or new challenge to your routines periodically can invigorate your system. Even changing your workspace, trying a new hobby, or learning a new concept can trigger dopamine in ways that support creativity, learning, and resilience. The key is to introduce novelty in a way that supports long-term goals, not as a form of escape or distraction. When you put this all together, mastering your internal reward system is about becoming a better steward of your dopamine. You want to maintain a healthy baseline, avoid overloading the system with constant high peaks, and reinforce the behaviors that matter most by making effort itself feel rewarding. You do this through cognitive framing, strategic use of stressors like cold and breath, smart nutrition and sleep, controlled digital environments, and clear goal setting. In doing so, you shift from being at the mercy of external rewards and compulsions to becoming someone who can sustain deep work, long-term goals, and meaningful progress. You learn to find pleasure in the process, not just the outcome. And in neuroscience terms, this is the most adaptive and sustainable way to build a high-functioning, motivated, and focused mind. Your ability to learn, adapt, focus, and maintain high performance over the long term depends not just on how much you do, but how well your nervous system recovers, consolidates, and reshapes itself. This happens largely through mechanisms that occur during sleep, non-sleep deep rest NSDR, and deliberate cognitive training. These are not passive or secondary to the active pursuit of goals. They are foundational elements in creating durable neural circuitry and a resilient brain. The first and most powerful of these mechanisms is sleep. Sleep is not just a time when your brain shuts off. It is a highly active, highly orchestrated process. During sleep, and particularly during specific stages of sleep, your brain and body engage in critical processes that influence everything from memory consolidation to emotional regulation, motor skill enhancement, and immune function. Deep sleep, also known as slow wave sleep or stage 3 non-REM sleep, is where the brain undergoes synaptic homeostasis. This means pruning away irrelevant neural connections while strengthening the important ones. If you learn a new skill or consume a new concept during the day, it is during deep sleep that your brain decides what to keep and what to let go of. REM sleep, which typically occurs more in the latter part of the night, is critical for emotional processing and integrating information in creative ways. Dreams are often a byproduct of this process, and although their content may not always be logical, the act of dreaming itself is believed to play a role in making abstract connections between disparate pieces of knowledge. This is why people often solve problems or gain insight after a good night's sleep. The brain literally reconfigures the way information is wired. But good sleep doesn't just happen, it is set in motion by behaviors earlier in the day. Your sleep quality is influenced heavily by your circadian rhythm, which, as discussed earlier, is anchored by early morning light and movement. But equally important is the absence of light, particularly blue light, in the evening. Artificial light delays the release of melatonin, the hormone that signals to your body that it's time to wind down. Avoiding bright lights and screens in the final 90 minutes before bed allows melatonin to rise naturally and helps initiate the sleep process. Temperature also plays a role. Your body needs to drop by 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit in core temperature to fall asleep effectively. Taking a hot bath or shower 60 to 90 minutes before bed paradoxically helps this process by drawing blood to the surface of your body and allowing your core to cool faster once you're out. Cooling your room ideally to about 65 degrees Fahrenheit 5 degrees Celsius supports this temperature shift and helps promote deep sleep. Another powerful, often underused tool for recovery and neural plasticity is non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR. NSDR is an umbrella term that includes practices like yoga nidra, certain forms of meditation, and self-hypnosis. These practices guide the body into a deeply relaxed state, often just above sleep, where brainwave activity shifts into theta and delta ranges. During NSDR, the autonomic nervous system shifts into parasympathetic dominance. Heart rate slows, cortisol levels drop, and the body enters a recovery mode that's similar to deep sleep but accessible during waking hours. One of the most fascinating aspects of NSDR is its effect on learning. Research shows that engaging in NSDR for just 10 to 30 minutes after a learning bout, such as a focused work session, study period, or motor skill training, can significantly enhance memory consolidation. In fact, in some studies, a 20-minute NSDR session has been shown to restore levels of alertness and performance comparable to an hour of nap or even more. This is especially useful in high-performance environments where rest time is limited. The mechanism appears to be linked to reactivation of neural circuits. After a focused learning effort, the brain continues to replay the patterns associated with that learning during rest, a process called replay or offline consolidation. NSDR enhances this replay by providing a low noise neural environment, that is, a state of minimal distractions and metabolic demands where the brain can efficiently sort, strengthen, and integrate what was just learned. So whether you're learning a language, writing code, rehearsing a speech, or practicing an instrument, following it with NSDR can dramatically increase the efficiency and durability of that learning. The accessibility of NSDR is one of its strengths. It doesn't require a special space or equipment. All you need is a quiet environment and a guide, which could be an app, a video, or even your own voice. The key is to allow the body to relax fully while the mind follows a structured protocol, often involving a body scan, breath awareness, and guided visualizations. NSDR can be practiced at any point during the day, but it's especially effective after intense cognitive work or in the afternoon slump when alertness naturally dips. Unlike naps, which can leave some people groggy, NSDR keeps you in a zone of relaxed wakefulness, restoring energy without disrupting nighttime sleep. Alongside sleep and NSDR, deliberate cognitive training is a way to reinforce neural resilience. Just as muscles strengthen through progressive overload, the brain grows through targeted, challenging activity, but only if it's followed by proper recovery. One of the most well-documented forms of cognitive training is working memory enhancement, such as using tasks that challenge your ability to hold and manipulate multiple items of information. These include games and exercises that involve pattern recognition, sequencing, or spatial navigation. However, the highest yield form of cognitive training isn't always a formal app or tool. It often comes from engaging deeply with demanding real-world tasks, solving complex problems, learning new frameworks, or switching between mental models. The key is to push your brain into what's called the zone of proximal development, that narrow band between what's easy and what's too hard. Operating in this space triggers neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience. This plasticity is heavily dependent on a neurochemical cocktail involving acetylcholine, dopamine, and norepinephrine. These neuromodulators are released during states of alert focus and emotional salience, so if you want to make cognitive training effective, you need to bring full attention to the task. Multitasking destroys this. Dopamine mocks the experience as meaningful, norepinephrine mobilizes energy, and acetylcholine sharpens the signalton. Oy's ratio, meaning your brain can more easily identify what's important and discard what's not, but again, without proper rest, none of this sticks. The analogy is lifting weights without allowing the muscles time to rebuild. Without recovery, your cognitive system becomes fatigued, and plasticity shuts down. This is why alternating blocks of deep work with rest, both short breaks during the day and structured recovery like NSDR and sleep, creates a rhythm that allows the brain to operate at peak capacity while preserving mental health. Cognitive resilience also depends on emotional regulation, and this is tightly linked to sleep. The amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, becomes hyperactive with poor sleep. This means that after even a single night of sleep loss, you're more reactive, less emotionally stable, and more prone to distraction. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate the amygdala, leading to impulsivity and reduced cognitive flexibility. So in many ways, prioritizing sleep and rest is not just about memory and focus. It's about safeguarding your capacity to make wise decisions, to persist through discomfort, and to adapt intelligently to changing demands. You can also train resilience through what's called cognitive reappraisal, a process by which you deliberately reframe the meaning of a challenge or stressor. When you practice looking at a difficult task as an opportunity for growth or a chance to improve rather than a threat or burden, you activate brain circuits that connect the prefrontal cortex with deeper limbic structures. Over time, this rewires your emotional responses to stress. And this form of reappraisal becomes more effective when your brain is rested and your nervous system is not in a chronically elevated arousal state. Finally, social connection and reflection also shape neural resilience. Having regular conversations that require perspective, taking empathy, and deep thinking about others' mental states, what psychologists call theory of mind, helps build prefrontal limbic integration. In other words, navigating complex social situations and reflecting on those interactions are forms of cognitive training that strengthen your ability to regulate emotions and think strategically. So when we look at the full spectrum of tools, sleep, NSDR, and cognitive engagement, what we see is a cycle. You engage your brain deeply, challenge it with new information or problems, then step away to rest. During that rest, your brain doesn't shut down, it reorganizes, strengthens, and refines the circuits that were activated during work. Then, when you return to the task, you come back stronger, sharper, and more adaptive. Over time, this builds a brain that is not only more productive, but also more resistant to burnout, fatigue, and distraction. The common mistake is to think of rest as optional, something you get to when there's time. But in reality, rest is the substrate that makes high performance possible. It is the soil in which learning takes root, it is the buffer that protects emotional balance, and it is the filter through which long-term memory and insight emerge. The future of performance, whether cognitive, physical, or emotional, belongs to those who can strategically cycle between engagement and recovery, who can use tools like NSDR and structured sleep protocols not just for restoration, but as active components of learning and growth, and who understand that the most powerful way to build resilience is not to push harder without pause, but to build patterns of rest that let the brain do what it does best: adapt, strengthen, and transform.